I just want to make sure that people can hear me in the back and this is working okay. Okay. Good morning. Thanks for coming back so promptly after tea break. And thank you very much for having this invitation to speak this morning. My name's Gianna Daly, and I'm Head of Clinical Services at the Child Bereavement Agency, Winston's Wish. I'd like to speak to you a little bit today about the effects of child bereavement, what the effects are on children, and also to talk about a very exciting new programme that we're running to support children who are very vulnerable and who are at risk of getting into difficult, risky behaviours that might lead them into offending. So let's just have a look at the first statement really, which is supporting children and young people to reach their full potential. As I was travelling into this conference this morning on the train, I gave it some just reflective time to see what I thought about the words helping children and young people reach their potential. And as a parent now with grown-up children, my very simple hopes were that my children would be healthy, that they would have enough money, hopefully a job, somewhere good to live, and hopefully a partner, and hopefully a family, so that they would repeat the cycle. It never once crossed my mind, when my children were young, when my children were growing up, that I might not be there for them. And actually just thinking about that sets the context for the next bit of the presentation. We don't know when we're going to die. We don't talk about death necessarily as a nation, as a population, because it's difficult. It's been spoken about before, but it's very much an elephant in the room in family life, in community life, in most lives. We don't like to speak about it. But children who don't have the opportunity to be able to speak about death, or death of their parent, or their mums or dads, or their brothers or sisters, are very much at a disadvantage through their lives because they're having to carry this very difficult secret or burden with them. I'd like to just give you an introduction into Winston's Wish, the charity that I work for. We've been around for over 20 years, providing good bereavement support for children, for their surviving parents, and for their brothers and sisters. We are very family focused. Death is something that happens within a family context, and we try to make sure that we honour the family by working with them as a family, but also working with children and parents separately. We've developed a tiered service over the past few years so that we can offer specific support at the right times in the right way. So we have a national helpline. We'd like it to be 24 hours, and we're working towards it at some point. But we have a national helpline, so anybody in the country who's been bereaved, either parent or a child or a professional, can get support and ask us for advice, and we will be able to help. We have specialist publications written for children, for families. We have just started a range of drop-ins, informal, community-based drop-in spaces for people to call in and talk about death, somebody they're grieving for, somebody that they have lost. And we do programs of both individual work and family work. We're specialists in our support programs for difficult deaths, traumatic deaths like suicide, like homicide, and we work specifically with military bereaved families. All of these particular groups have their own difficulties in being able to grieve their loved ones. Our service is run by trained, employed practitioners. It's not cheap, but the quality remains high, and we continue to work in that way and will do. So our clinicians come from a range of backgrounds. We have psychologists, psychotherapists, social workers, a lot of arts therapists, and family therapists. Just to give you some statistics on child bereavement, and I'm not sure how many people would know this. Every day of the year, 55 children lose their mum or their dad or their brother or sister through death. That means every year, 24,000 children are newly bereaved. By the time a child is 18, there will be 500,000, 480,000, almost 500,000 children who won't have their mum or their dad or brother or sister. And if we think about it in terms of the classroom space, and I'm talking small classes here I can see, but 1 in 29 children will be bereaved. that bereavement will affect the child, the class, the family, and probably the school community. It's very often unnoticed and goes unaddressed. I'm not suggesting for a minute that grief is anything but a natural and normal process. You know, the only thing really that we can guarantee in life is death. So we are hardwired to be able to cope with it in however it presents itself. But for children, and actually I think Maggie has already spoken about attachment theory, but when children are attached to their prime caregiver, to mum or dad or brother or sister, any kind of disruption to that attachment, that very important attachment, throws a child into chaos. And the chaos means, in terms of what happens in the brain, and it's also been spoken about this morning, the stress hormone cortisol floods the brain and it shuts down the more developed part of the brain, which is the frontal cortex, and floods the limbic system, so that children feel overwhelmed and in chaos. So, if unsupported, and generally families can do this well enough, but if the child isn't supported, a child who has lost mum or dad, brother or sister through death is much, much more likely, with this flooding of cortisol, to have physical health problems and more prone to accidents. If you think about, if you're overwhelmed, you're unlikely to be thinking what you're doing if you're crossing the road. So children are more likely to have traffic accidents or bike accidents, etc. In terms of mental health, if children are not supported through the grief process of mum or dad, brother or sister, 1 in 5 children will have a diagnosable mental health problem within the first year to 2 years of that death. So 1 in 5 will need a specialist service. It can either be our service, but very often they'll present with difficulties at school, or they'll present to the GP surgery or social services with chaotic behaviour or some kind of low-lying depression or anxiety. If we think about anxiety as well, if a child is in chaos and feels really very, very anxious, it's very difficult for them to regulate their emotions and their behaviour. So if they're flooded with anxiety and that persists over time, in a sense, those children feel they're never, ever going to get out of that anxiety, and over time that can lead to depression. For some of the older children, by the time they get into their early teens, by trying to sedate the feelings and emotions they have about a death they can't talk about or grieve about, they very often use alcohol and drugs to sedate them, to self-soothe, to get them into a quieter space. And with that goes the need for the money for drugs, the money for alcohol, and with that goes hand in hand pathways into risky behaviours that include offending. If I just go back and talk a little bit about attainment and achievement at school, if children are flooded with cortisol and they can't think straight, and that's actually what children will say, I can't think straight, I can't think about anything. If they can't think straight because their limbic system is flooded, they're not going to be able to get to school. They're going to be too overwhelmed for school. So they either get to school and leave very quickly, so they truant from school, or they don't go to school in the first place. And school is one place for children where they have the support of their peers, of teachers, who they can talk to, who they can chat to if they can't do that at home. So, just a quick summary really. Bereavement isn't a pathology, so it's not an illness. And I want to make it very clear, it's not an illness. We can get through this well enough. But if we're not supported, if we don't support children, their emotional suffering can lead to very long-term life consequences that are negative. So this is what we do. We offer a whole range of very family-focused therapeutic interventions by a trained team. Again, our interventions are very much rooted in psychological theory, attachment theory being the key one. Continuing bonds is where we enable a child to think about the dead person after they've died and retain that bond that they had as an attachment, as well as the dual process model and growing around their grief. We have a real understanding as an organisation and as a team of the uniqueness of that grief process, and it goes through various stages. So our particular model facilitates the child and family through that process, and we are timely and we take our time, and we let the child and family work at their pace and not ours. We are very specific about allowing a child to access emotions and grieve them in the most primitive of ways if that's what's right for them. We make sure children remember mum or dad, not by forgetting about them. You'll often hear people say to children, you need to forget about it, you need to get on with life. Children don't get on with life. They have to remember mum or dad, because mum or dad was very important. And you often hear children say, I'm worried I can't remember my mum. It's only last year and I don't remember her anymore. What will it mean for me later on? So we make sure that doesn't happen. We help them with telling the story of what happened when somebody died. That's really important. It helps the child have a narrative for talking about it at school, or actually they have their own narrative for later on in life. And we give them the coping strategies, usually cognitive coping strategies, to help them move on. Okay, I hope this is all right. I'm going to give you a little introduction to the work that we do. And this is also an introduction to a very specific targeted programme we're working on at the moment called Switch. It's about 5 minutes long, so I hope you will be able to bear with me. And actually, I hope I can turn this on. I think I've got it. Okay.
Every 22 minutes, a child in Britain is bereaved of a parent. This could be a child in your street, your community, your family. The death of a parent, brother or sister is one of the most fundamental losses a child will ever face. At Winston's Wish, we believe that bereaved children need support to make sense of death and to rebuild their lives. The charity was established in 1992 to ensure that every bereaved child can access the support that is right for them at the right time. Studies show that unaddressed childhood grief can have a long-lasting and deep emotional impact on the well-being of a child and can create many difficulties in later life. Drawing on our extensive experience, we have been working tirelessly to create a wide range of services and programmes that put the family at the heart of everything we do. Our national helpline offers support and guidance to anyone caring for or supporting a bereaved child or young person. Our highly trained staff are there to listen. They understand how hard it is for children and families to come to terms with the death of a loved one.
I first contacted the Winston Wish helpline when my wife died through suicide. The person I spoke to was really, really helpful, very warm and caring, and they really helped me to think through how I needed to speak to my children about what had happened. I'd recommend to anybody to call the Winston Wish helpline.
We've listened really carefully to what our families need. We've developed really specialist skills in working with families bereaved through suicide, homicide and military deaths. These families in particular are most at risk of isolation through their experiences and where our services are most helpful. We also support families through accident and illness deaths. This is supported by drop-in services which offer high quality support, open to all, in a nice informal and relaxed setting.
Our weekend and day groups offer children and young people a range of fun and therapeutic activities. They provide a great opportunity for the children to mix with others who are going through a similar experience, encouraging the sharing of memories and promoting confidence building. We know that some things can't just be made better, but we also know that by supporting bereaved families to share their experiences with each other, we can help to lift the heavy weight of loneliness and incomprehension that comes with the grief of bereavement.
Trust is a big thing in things like this. It's definitely really good fun, and most of the time it's not all just focused on that one question everyone's dreaded.
It's good because you like meet other people that have like been through what you've been through, and like makes you realise that you're not the only one.
For a child, the death of a loved one changes everything and can impact their education and their relationship with family and friends. For some children, our community outreach programme Switch improves their access to our services. We help these children to understand the impact that death is having on their life, their behaviours and their relationships. We support children to recognise and manage difficult feelings and to learn and share coping mechanisms. As a result, we build their self-esteem and their resilience, enabling them to positively rebuild their lives.
When Holly first joined us, we were aware that she had been experiencing friendship issues at a previous school and had very low self-esteem.
I kept falling out with my friends. I was sad and grumpy, and I was angry and horrible to other people.
After I'd completed some work with Holly, she was brave enough to tell me that her grandmother, that she was particularly close to, had died, and her stepbrother had been killed in a traffic accident.
I got involved with the Switch programme because my brother, Mikey, and my two nannies died. When I first went to the group, we just did some work on who died and what age and when, and we did some other work on how we feel and what we did when we weren't involved with Winston's Wish. I knew that I was getting help, and I knew that I was going to meet some people who was going through the same thing that I went through. It's definitely helped me, and I would recommend it.
Transformation in Holly has been just tremendous.
Now I'm able to smile, and I didn't be able to do that when I was the other person that I used to be.
Grief is, by its very nature, a painful experience, but at Winston's Wish we help children and their families to come to terms with those feelings, rebuilding confidence and empowering them to move on with their lives. We are there to listen during the darkest moments, and we will give children the support they need at the right time. As the UK's leading childhood bereavement charity, we rely almost entirely on donations and the kindness of our staff and volunteers. Bereavement affects all of us at some point in our lives, so please help us to keep making a difference.
So you can see that Holly in that video clip there is one of the little children that's been on this very specialist programme. Just pick up some things that Holly said. She talked about being that other person. And I think when children are bereaved and don't get the opportunity to talk about the death, they do feel that they have been completely cut off. They feel as though there is someone else inside them, that it's another person. They become dissociated. We talked about a little earlier in terms of behaviours, and for children who are vulnerable, the difficult to reach children, the ones who come from poorer backgrounds, where there may be less social skills, less family support, less community support, these children particularly are at risk, and they're at risk of getting into very, very difficult situations if they're not helped with some grief support. When children are very, very little, and they have we all have an emotional life, but children often act out their emotions through their behaviour, and it was talked about earlier on this morning. It's really important to watch out for children's behaviour, because children do things for a reason, and the reasons that they do things or act out or put their behaviour out there in the world is very often a clue to their emotional life. Because they may not have the words to be able to explain what's going on. And they may not have the words because they just don't know. It's emotion. So, let me tell you a little bit about our Switch project. It's a community outreach intervention, slightly different from what we normally do. It's working with The professionals, where these children may already have had some input, so with social work teams, police teams, child and adolescent mental health services, we are specific about making sure that these children who are more vulnerable come to our programme, and they wouldn't normally come to us via our helpline self-referral because they probably have parents who are either too ashamed to phone or wouldn't phone anyway. So this is a targeted programme. Again, we use our evidence base to put a really good programme out there for them, and this programme is slightly different. These children wouldn't be able to manage a whole day at a day group, neither would they manage a weekend at all, or like you saw some of the children here. They wouldn't manage that. They don't have the attentional ability. So we have to make sure that for these children, there are small groups between 6 and 8 children with 2 practitioners, and we base 4 group sessions over 2 weeks. So the Tuesday, Thursday, Tuesday, Thursday. We trialled it out originally, and weekly wasn't enough. More than weekly would be too much. It's about getting it just right, and that's about the pace that's right for these children. We've been very lucky, very fortunate to be supported in our funding by Big Lottery, and the Big Lottery and their associated groups of organisations have been very helpful for us in helping us determine how to do this. Okay, so I've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get through as much as I can. We want to help children understand the impact that this bereavement is having on their behaviour, their life and their relationships. And we do this by helping them to recognise their feelings, actually accessing them, talking about them, so that they realise that their behaviours are related to their emotions and the emotion is related to the grief. We get them to talk to each other, we get them to share coping strategies, we give them coping strategies. They meet others who are bereaved, and that's important for them because it means that they don't feel that they're isolated. It's not just them it's happened to, that others in the world, this happens to them too. And in time, it builds confidence, resilience and esteem. I'm just going to quickly move on to show you some of the outcomes. We want them to manage emotion. If they can manage emotion, they'll be able to manage themselves. If they can manage themselves, they'll manage their behaviour. If they can manage their behaviour, we can get them into school. And if we get them into school, it means they've got a capacity to learn, to build their self-esteem and to improve their peer and family relationships. Longer term, and we'll be following these children over the next 10 years and hopefully 15, even 20 years, we want to see whether by doing this early on, this very important intervention, that they can develop resilience, have the same kind of hopes and dreams that their non-bereaved peers would have, and a potential for making good quality, lasting relationships, both with people and also with work. Very quickly, we've used Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire before the group at 6 months, and we've got a very small sample at 12 months. If I just show you 3 of these, overall stress symptoms in 6 months had reduced by 33% and had continued to 38% at 12 months. Small sample, I know, but it's given us some hope that we're going in the right direction. In terms of behavioural difficulties, a small reduction at first, just 12%, but at 12 months, this has gone up to a huge 50%, and that's exactly what we're looking for, so that these children can manage behaviour and not get into risky behaviours that lead to offending. And in terms of development of a diagnosable mental health problem, 23% reduction at 6 months, increasing to 40% at 12 months. So we think and we hope that we're on the right track. Let me just sum up what I've got to say. Please know that childhood bereavement affects a child's futures. They absolutely need to have support. We need to collaborate on this so that we know when this happens and that we work together to make sure children really do reach their potential. Thank you very much.